Hello, everyone, and welcome back to People Jew Want to Know podcast. I have a very interesting, very provocative, and somewhat controversial guest for you today, Adam Scott Bellos. Adam is a serial entrepreneur and CEO of the Israel Innovation Fund, or TIF, an organization dedicated to strengthening Jewish identity, promoting Zionism, and building cultural and economic resilience in Israel. Born and raised in Cincinnati, Adam's global journey has taken him across the U.S., China, and Israel, shaping his unique perspective on entrepreneurship and Jewish culture. Adam's connection to Israel deepened during pivotal moments, including his participation in the March of the Living at age 18 and a semester abroad at Tel Aviv University while studying at the University of Arizona. These experiences ultimately led him to make Aliyah and serve in the IDF. After his military service, Adam pursued different ventures, from working for a politician to managing an Israel belly dancing company in China, which broadened his understanding of how business can foster cultural understanding. Adam founded TIF to create meaningful connections to Jewish culture and community. His flagship initiative, Wine on the Vine, reimagines traditional tree planting programs by focusing on Israeli vineyards, offering wine sales, winery tours, and grapevine sponsorships. Through his popular video series, Wine with Adam, he engages in thought-provoking conversations about Jewish identity and Israeli culture. In the wake of events like October 7th, Adam has become a vocal advocate for Jewish self-defense and resilience, emphasizing the need for action alongside awareness. He has been published in outlets like the Jerusalem Post, and he hosts a YouTube series called Unfiltered with Adam, where he explores pressing issues facing the Jewish community. Adam's work is driven by a commitment to building a cultural and social Zionist movement that resonates with the next generation. So nothing from this bio reads provocative or controversial in any way. So let me connect the dots for you here. Here's how I learned of Adam. As someone who in the last year has become chronically online, I one day came across Adam's profile when he made yet another one of his videos where he was bashing the Anti-Defamation League, the ADL. My impression of the ADL has always been overwhelmingly positive. They've been around since the 1910s, they're a massive Jewish nonprofit, and they have a ton of influence on Jewish affairs, especially in the American diaspora. Whenever you see major pieces of research come through about the state of the Jewry or partnerships between the U.S. government and a Jewish nonprofit, it's usually the ADL that's leading the way. Their mission is to stop the defamation of the Jewish people and to secure justice and fair treatment to all. Of course, then I was surprised to see that somebody was writing aggressive criticisms against the ADL. But what I gleaned from Adam's post was that his criticisms were specifically rooted towards leadership who he claimed are millionaires that failed to serve our Jewish community. To put it simply, his point was that if the organization is making more money, if it's growing, but anti-Semitism is also growing, that means the ADL is doing something wrong. ADL's success should be measured on the reduction of anti-Semitism, not its growth, which means those executives should be fired. This was his big issue that he was posting about. This was his hill to die on. And more interestingly, he spent an extensive time talking about how the influencers and activists that are posting and being funded by these Jewish nonprofits, they're not actually contributing in a meaningful way because they're reaching an audience that already agrees with them. In Adam's view, the investment of Jewish nonprofits is geared towards tactics that don't work and perhaps have never worked. So this is at the root of his criticism. I'll add that what makes Adam's position so controversial is not only the fact that he's criticizing people and organizations that do great and important work, but it's also how he delivers his criticism. Adam has a very direct, forgive me, Adam, abrasive style. It's like when people start a sentence with, I don't mean to be rude, but, like, you know you're being rude when you say that. In some sense, this style garners attention because sensationalism sells, and at the same time, I imagine his style has formed as a result of the fact that he's been sharing the same message for over a decade, and he hasn't been heard. For example, I had a chance to chat briefly with one of Adam's former professors in college. That professor confirmed for me that even going as far back as Adam's student years, Adam has been sounding the alarm on growing campus anti-Semitism and the dangers of BDS and anti-Zionism. And to the Jewish organizations at the time, and even now I might argue, it simply wasn't either evident or just not as much of a priority. And this is the same criticism that I had as a student on my campus, Hillel. They were overly flexible with JVP Jews. They just couldn't take a hard principled look at what their obligation was to students on campus. So I imagine, of course, if you've been saying the same thing over and over and you're not heard, it will create some frustration in you. Now, let me say a few things on that. I think at the end of the day, delivery matters. Communication is on the communicator. In the world of Jewish nonprofits, politics, advocacy, you get more bees with honey. You just do. It's a tough pill to swallow, but it's true. There's some required ass-kissing and ally building. I also think that Jewish nonprofits and activists especially do put out great work and that it is important for the education of our own people. There's a benefit there. Even if the nonprofits haven't been able to combat anti-Semitism effectively, that doesn't automatically erase the great contributions they have had. Adam also knows this. There are things that I agree with him through and through, and then there are things that I don't agree with him on at all. And you'll get to hear that in the episode. For instance, I don't agree with him on his patrilineal Jew position. And I also don't agree entirely on all Jews embracing Israeli as their cultural marker. I'm a former Soviet Union Jew. My identity is different than an Israeli Jew. My cultural values are different. FSU Jews are more Eastern European, and Israeli Jews are more Middle Eastern. Where I agree with Adam is that the world will always view us as Jews. Not Americans, not Russians, not Germans, as Jews. My point is that I view myself as a Jew and Ukrainian. Others may view themselves as a Jew and Asian, a Jew and Mexican. And I'll say that I more closely connect with other Ukrainian people than I do with Israelis sometimes. And that's okay. Our ability to permeate other cultures and enrich them with our own traditions is something to celebrate, not to condemn, in my opinion. One final thing I want to say on this before you hear from Adam. The criticism that an organization like the ADL does not have an incentive to combat anti-Semitism because they make more money when there's more anti-Semitism is like saying there's no incentive to cure cancer because pharma companies make more money treating cancer than curing it. It's a dark thought. Even if it were true, it is only true until a player comes on the market and solves the problem. The BlackBerry phone was the most popular phone in the world until the iPhone came in. BlackBerry didn't evolve, so it died. The same is true for Jewish nonprofits. Evolve or die. Now, anti-Semitism isn't going away, so I think the ADL isn't going out of business. But one of the questions I posed to Adam is why he thinks an organization like the ADL can't evolve. You'll hear him break it down, but I think his point summed up is that they're too incompetent to realize they have to evolve. Again, even if this is true, I'm positive that there will always be new entrants into the market, new companies, new nonprofits, new businesses offering other solutions. In fact, Adam's company is an example of this. The truth always lies in the middle. Some of Adam's criticisms are true and valid, and Jewish nonprofits do good work and are important. When you listen to this episode, try to look for the truth in between what he's saying and really hear him out. Don't let his direct and harsh demeanor prevent you from hearing where he has a point. I am super grateful that I had a chance to bring on Adam. I find him absolutely fascinating as a personality with some really refreshing takes. And I hope you take away a lot from the episode, even if you're like me and you disagree with some of what he has to say. On that note, please enjoy this episode. Hello, Adam. Welcome to People Do You Want to Know podcast. How are you on this fine day?
I am doing so well. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. And I hope that your listeners know that I've had a wonderful time getting to know you leading up to this recording. So I just want to say it's a pleasure to be here again, and thanks for having me.
I'm very touched, and that's how I want to do things on People Do You Want to Know podcast. So thank you so much. My first question for you is, tell us about yourself. What do you do, and how did you get there?
I run something called the Israel Innovation Fund. People might be more familiar with our flagship project called Wine on the Vine that started with allowing people to plant grapevines instead of trees. I basically got here because I realized that Jewish organizations can't connect to young people and that there is a major disconnect between Israel and the diaspora and Israel, and truly understanding what it means to be a modern Jew. I felt that there was a lacking of a mindset of Jewish sovereignty versus the exilic Jew. And we wanted to create a new type of Zionist institution that would change that in the diaspora and in Israel in terms of creating and blossoming that type of connection between both sides of the Jewish people. Our mission statement is bringing Israel to you and then you to Israel. So, that's really how I came to the conclusion and the work that I do now. It was from the failings of all of the Jewish institutions and, the lack of results that modern Jewish education in North America, the lack of results that it produces. And also just my time in Israel being a consultant for a number of politicians and my education in Judaic and Middle Eastern history from the University of Arizona and Tel Aviv University. I'm definitely a product of my experiences, and I'm definitely a product of my education. So that's kind of how I got to where I am, or why I am where I am. Some people heavily disagree with me, so much so that they're constantly finding reasons to trash my reputation. And some people heavily agree with me. And what I've noticed over the last 480 days so far since October 7th is that many of my criticisms are now being brought to light, and that for the last 20 years, instead of maybe a few Jewish executives possibly listening to my suggestions, we are now stuck in the greatest time of anti-Semitism since the Holocaust, with no solutions on how to solve those problems. And they mostly just go back to cultivating Jewish identity. And I know I'm kind of elaborating from your original question, but I'll just say one thing. The one thing that I do notice is that now they're running and scrambling all these organizations, the synagogues, the rabbis, the educators. They just want to put Band-Aids on everything, and they still don't want to return to the root problem of what is causing a disconnect not only with Israel, but a connection to Jewish civilization or Jewish identity. And it's that they don't want to admit that Hebrew and self-defense are the two main things that you have to start giving Jewish children at the earliest age possible to completely change the Jewish community and the diaspora. That's how we've gotten to where I am. Oh, and drinking Israeli wine is the most important thing for the Israeli economy. But that's how we've gotten to where I am, if that answers your question, who I am and what I do.
I love that. And the reason I brought you on the podcast is because, to me, you are a provocative figure on social media, because you not only talk about things that I consider inconvenient truths, but you also talk about them in a very provocative way. And for those listening, to put it lightly, to put it diplomatically. Okay, for those people listening that are not familiar with your criticisms, can you break down what are the issues you think are facing the modern Jewry, and what specifically is the disconnect between Israeli Jews and the diaspora Jews?
I think that the biggest criticism that I have, and I think that everybody kind of knows, and where I have made most of my mistakes professionally in this industry, which I really wish I could burn to the ground, excuse my language, is that everybody cares about what other people think, and it dictates everything. And instead of doing what's necessarily right for the Jewish people or hard to do that's right for Jewish Americans, everybody's always concerned with what will people think. And that is what has gotten us killed throughout history. And the denial of the reality that we are in is one of my biggest criticisms. And that's what got people killed in Hebron in 1929, in the Holocaust, and in Europe throughout the 20th century, even somewhat in Israel with the peace process and the Oslo Accords and the Intifadas and every single conflict that has really happened in Israel since 1929 or even the early 1920s. The only true people that were ready to admit these inconvenient truths were the early Zionists. And that's why they were the minority. And that's why the early Zionist leaders were considered the rebellion against the rabbinic elite who held all of the power over the leadership of the Jewish people and controlled them and kept them, in this stagnant place. Obviously, I have a very large problem with the fact that the head of the ADL makes a $1.1 million a year with $100 million plus budget and is running around talking about, like they're doing so much good when anti-Semitism has increased 900%, let alone in the last year. What were they doing the last 20 years to prevent this from happening? If I was a student 17 years ago, and my last year of school, I was checking under my car for a bomb every day because I actually thought these kids wanted to kill me. And we figured out that the MSU and the SJP and all these organizations were completely linked to Hamas based on their rhetoric, their propaganda, and where they were coming from in the world. How the hell did these $100 million organizations, these Hillels, the ADL, the JNF, all these federations, all these synagogues, all these rabbis. How did the leadership not take immediate, movement forward to try to curb this? And it was always because we want this wide open tent. I hate the wide open tent idea of the Jewish people. It's the dumbest thing in the world. If your mother converts to Jews for Jesus in prison, okay, I'm sorry, like, you don't belong at Chabad or Hillel. Like, I apologize. Like, maybe that makes me a bigot. I don't know. I don't think it does. But you get my point. We have become this people that have a religion of organizations, not a religion of different branches of Judaism. We are obsessed with these organizations. Our American Jewish expression is done through writing checks. And if you can't write checks, you do not matter. And that is the biggest criticism that I have. I'm sorry, but when somebody like Jonathan Greenblatt goes on the news after their star-studded gala with Ben Stiller, okay, and says, last night was electric, okay, and the next day, all of the Jews in New York are being physically attacked. That is a disconnect of immeasurable results of what the hell is going on. It's like the Jewish elite are sitting drinking non-kosher wine while Rome is burning. We have no solutions that are being perpetuated. We've become a people and an industry and institutions obsessed with personalities that they think will help them raise money when they don't. One of the things that if you look at the data, people don't actually buy things that Jewish influencers tell them to buy. They want actual people that are known for these specific, things to go and buy. My criticisms are so immeasurable after 17 years of doing this. And I guess my last criticism would be, instead of addressing the criticisms, and not just of me, of many people, they always want to attack the one who is criticizing, not the argument that they're making. And instead of having a wonderful, beautiful Jewish dialogue like the Talmud taught us to do, we are vilifying people that question. And I think that is really a big problem right now. And I think that using Jewish influencers to silence that opposition, and that's really what's going on right now. You have these institutions paying people to perpetuate a false narrative of Jewish life and what the Jewish experience is, and also what it's like in Israel. Because if you saw, all of the people that were just flown over there have basically just been showing themselves partying all the time, which I'm sorry, but I don't understand why the Ministry of Foreign Affairs is paying for rich American Jews to go party when there are people that are homeless and there are hostages that are still over there. It all comes back to the same thing. We're completely disconnected from the reality that has been building for many, many, many years.
Adam, I have to tell you, I find it so funny that on Instagram, your bio says the influencer's influencer, but at the same time, so much of your content is bashing influencers.
Well, okay, first of all, so the influencer's influencer is a joke from when, Hillel Silverman, who's a very close friend of mine, used to work for Wine on the Vine. She did for many years. We do a lot of professional work together. We share a lot of close personal friends as well. I used to joke about how stupid this stuff was. I'm out here actually trying to do things. And as well, when people would come to Israel, they would call us to take the celebrities around or the VIPs around so they wouldn't get hit up for money. And they would have a no pressure, no political, just get them drunk, take them to party, let them have a good time at these wineries environment. And we did that a lot with the Maccabee Task Force and other great organizations that are in Israel. And people always call me asking for, what's the great restaurant recommendation? Where do I get this thing that I saw you wearing? I have a very distinct sense of style. It's been that way for a very long time. I lived in China for a little bit and all my clothing was custom made. My great grandfather had a clothing store. So, fashion and style has always been kind of a natural thing for me. It's not something I really have to try with, if that makes any sense. So we would joke that everybody would constantly be asking me for advice on whether it was food or wine or film or whatever. I just said, I'm the influencer's influencer that is not worried about social media. So I just wrote that as a joke. It's just I could just imagine the things that I could write just as a joke and, it would just cause nonstop controversy. And I think that's exactly what people like Elon Musk love to do, and people like Donald Trump love to do. And it's just to see how the sheep just freak out the second they think, a lion is coming, if that makes any sense. The disconnect between Israeli Jews and diaspora Jews is very simple. It's the difference between having a sovereign mindset and having the mindset of a Jew of exile, and how you see the world and how you view the world's events happening through the lenses of 3,500 years of Jewish history. I don't think that you need to be an Israeli citizen to be an Israeli. I think that being Israeli and being a modern Jew now is a mindset. It is a mindset of vigilance. It is a mindset of sovereignty. It is a mindset of being a proud Jew that can stand with their back straight and their eyes forward. It's about being a Jew that is unshackled by 3,500 years of trauma. And it's also a Jew that isn't defined by the fucking Holocaust. Because if there is anything that I am getting so sick of is hearing about the Holocaust. Excuse my language. Okay. There's been a lot of violence against Jews since the Holocaust. The Holocaust was not a unique thing in our history. It was maybe a unique thing in the amount of people that were killed. Okay, but this has been happening since the first exile, if not before. We were taught that, the Amalekites attacked us from behind and went after the women and the children. If you read Yardena Schwartz's new book on the 1929 Hebron riots, which is an amazing book. I studied abroad with her at Tel Aviv University. It's probably one of the best books I've read on the subject. The 1929 riots are exactly the same as October the 7th. That's the argument that she's making, and she does a very good job making it. I am so sick of hearing, as a child of Holocaust survivors, as a grandchild of Holocaust survivors, everybody's had Jews killed in their family. Everybody has survived anti-Semitism. If you are a Jew alive today, you have survived 3,500 years of anti-Semitism. You have survived the Farhud. You have survived the raging of the Mellahs of North Africa. Okay, you have survived the Holocaust. You've survived October 7th. You've survived 1929. You survived anti-Semitism in North America. You survived Spain. Okay, you survived if you're Ashkenazi, you survived having your people thrown into cages and shipped to Rome and shipped all over the Roman Empire. We have all experienced anti-Semitism. We have all experienced dehumanization. Get over it. I'm tired of hearing about it. I'm tired of young Jews being held back. I'm tired of that being the defining thing, instead of what the real definition of being a modern Jewish is: being a part of the people who reignited history once again by building and creating the state of Israel, who are brave enough to unchain themselves of all this bullshit and say, we're going to fight back now. And I can tell you right now, if you know anything about the early Zionist leaders, the biggest opposition was about fighting back. And that is really the definition of what American Jews specifically have gone through. Because if you take the case of Jonathan Pollard, it was Ruth Bader Ginsburg who basically sealed his fate in being in prison for 30 years because they were very worried about dual loyalty. If you look at what happened with the Iran deal, the Jewish community was extremely afraid to really go against President Barack Obama, who we now know he intentionally created a campaign to split the Jewish community politically, which the Jewish community has not recovered from since then. Okay, and we saw that in this last election heavily.
How did that happen?
He wanted this peace process, the JCPOA with Iran. He knew it was going to be impossible, and the whole thing was about splitting the liberal and conservative Jews apart to alienate Israel in order to get the Jewish support for the Iran deal, even though the majority of people knew that this was a bad idea. Surprisingly, I didn't know this. The ADL actually went against the Iran deal. I was very surprised about that. A number of federations couldn't make a definitive statement. Everybody was worried. And let's face it, if you're following politics today and you're Jewish, every Jewish organization should be outside of Chuck Schumer's office right now demanding his resignation. I really think that, that's the main difference. Israeli Jews are ready to fight. They're ready to defend themselves. They're ready to defend Jews around the world. I don't see that with North American Jews. I see that with other diaspora Jews. But let's face it, we're in a reality where Australian Jews, their days are numbered. And we're in a reality where the English Jews do not feel safe and do not see themselves with a future that is possible in England. So if you want to stay in the diaspora, the only way is going to be possible is doing the exact opposite of what everybody's been telling you need to do. And it ain't going to be by writing a check to an organization.
So do you think all Jews should live in Israel?
No, I changed that. That was a view of mine until 2021.
Tell me more about
the
that.
war in Gaza made me change that opinion. It was when I saw the businesses in Los Angeles getting destroyed. And I said to myself, you can't have a strong Israel if you don't have a strong diaspora, because if Jews can't live in the diaspora, the world must not be safe for Jews. And if the world isn't safe for Jews, then it's not safe for Israel. And that's what we're seeing now. I always believed in the Hebrew and self-defense stuff that I talk about, but I've always been extremely adamant about starting with wine, and though that being the thing to not only build the institution, but the vehicle to be able to deliver those things, and, and building the economic iron wall around Israel. So it became very clear to me that I was wrong about every Jew needing to be in Israel. We need Jews in the diaspora, but they have to be extremely strong Jews.
As you were speaking, I was thinking about history, because you talk about the importance of seeing the trends over history and being able to let go of certain past experiences that have affected us. But when you think about the Roman Empire, we used to have 4 types of Jews: Sadducee, Pharisee, Zealots, and Essenes, right? And for example, Jesus was a Pharisee Jew, and the Zealots were the Jews that lived on top of Masada and all died there. I would say in some way, I'm wired kind of like you, where I'll say we have to be proud, we have to fight back, we have to learn how to defend ourselves, all values that I deeply agree with. And there was a podcast guest that I had that is a very left-leaning woman. She teaches the only Jewish studies program in all of Japan. And she said, okay, Margarita, let's take the Zealots. You think they're so heroic. If at that time all Jews were like the Zealots, they would have all committed suicide on top of Masada. There would be no Jews left to carry on the lineage. So in some sense, the concept of survival and assimilation, it has protected us. And there's a weird balance to strike between the two.
That's an incorrect. Her observation of the Zealots and the other 4 or the other 3 branches are very incorrect. Let me say why.
Okay.
1, the Zealots were a minority. 2, the Zealots were wrong. They were slaughtering sheep instead of feeding the people of Jerusalem when they were under siege. They were the reason, and I will get to this. And by the way, this is a very important thing that you have brought up. It's the core of the same type of problems that we're dealing with now, okay? The Zealots committed suicide because of that situation and them being the last holdouts. The Zealots weren't really committing suicide prior to Masada, and it's the last story that we have of the Zealots, really, because it was the last stronghold, okay? And they didn't want to go into slavery because they saw what happened after Jerusalem. Also, this period is the reason why we have matrilineal descent. It's because, and a lot of people don't realize this, the reason why a Jew comes from their mother is because for thousands of years, just like on October 7th, and in the pogroms, Jewish women were being raped. The entire discussion on patrilineal Jewry or matrilineal Jewry or who is a Jew, I really hate it. There's obviously exceptions to the rule. There are obviously people who want to get involved. We'll go back to the 4 groups in a second, but this is connected, okay? When you start to say that somebody that comes from a patrilineal Jew is the same as somebody that comes from a matrilineal Jew, maybe because you disagree with halakha or whatever, you are disregarding the strength and the survival that Jewish women have had to endure for 3,500 years. It is extremely important to appreciate that concept, because when you take away that from Jewish women, you disregard the half of our population that have kept us alive, more so than the men, in my opinion. And I think it's disgusting what had just happened on social media, where there was this whole argument on assimilation or whatever, especially because it's not the argument that we need to be having right now. We have a war going on and we have hostages. But I'll wrap this around so it all makes sense, okay? First of all, it was usually only 2 groups in Jewish history, the priesthood and then the rest of the people. You had the Sadducees, who really represented the priests, and then you had the rabbis, who were the spiritual leaders of the people. The one thing that we know about the priesthood is that while they were able to maintain the Levites and the Kohanim's purity or whatever in their laws on marriage and not marrying converts and divorcees and maintaining their line so well that we can test for the Kohen marker or the Levite marker in DNA, and it's correct, and we know that it's correct, and it's one of the few times genetics are used to prove tribal affiliation, because that it's not the case for being a Jew as a whole. Even in the arguments of the Talmud, they talk about the difference of the interpretation the purity and impurity during Yom Kippur of the different opinions of the Sadducees and the Pharisees. So like the Pharisees wanted the high priest to dip in the mikveh twice before going into the Holy of Holies, where the Sadducees only wanted it once. So the Pharisees would always go and touch the priest before he went in, so he would have to do it again. The difference was a differentiation of how to interpret our law. Do we use the oral law or not? The oral law was something that could take away power of the priesthood. Okay. The priesthood, obviously, because their power relied on the centrality of the temple, needed to take that power away from the people. It's one of the reasons why the temple fell. It's one of the reasons why there was these clashes between the different branches of government, because we were the first kingdom to have a separation of power with the prophets, the king, the judges, and the priesthood. Very important, extremely complicated, but very important. The Zealots only emerged as a result of the Roman Empire. So they were not part of our people for thousands of years. This ideology was not part of our people for thousands of years. And many people could argue that Jesus would have been a zealot based on the writings in the New Testament, because he was an adamant Zionist who said, render unto Caesar what is Caesar's. And he's talking about the Romans getting out of Judea. And there are a number of quotes, they try to make Jesus out to be a pacifist. He wasn't such a pacifist. But again, the Essenes as well emerged as a result of the Romans and the Greeks, and were the people who wrote the Dead Sea Scrolls. And also, it's pretty clear that Jesus, based on things that are written in the New Testament, spent a significant amount of time with the Essenes. His missing years could have been with the Essenes. And they were just an apocalyptic cult of gay men, basically, in my opinion. If you've ever read rules of the Essenes, they have a significant amount of mention about displaying male genitalia and that being forbidden. This is what I studied in college. I took a course called Apocalyptic Literature. We spent a significant amount of time studying the Essenes, their discussion of what it is to be the Son of Man, and we went through the Dead Sea Scrolls, and we went through a lot of the writings of the Essenes. And by the way, this is the type of thing that most people don't read. One of my biblical criticism teachers in college had a saying about the Bible and biblical literature. If they said not to do it, it meant that people did it, they did it a lot, and they liked it. Okay, so like a great example is not eating shellfish. And 2 years ago, they discovered hundreds of thousands of shellfish bones in a former ancient Israelite camp. If you take what Jewish philosophy says about the closeness to God, the closeness of interpersonal relationships, the fact that man should not be alone, they really kind of went against the trend. They were an apocalyptic cult. They were also wiped out by the Romans. Again, a minority of the people. The Zealots were a minority of the people. The Pharisees and the way they thought at that time was really the spiritual majority and spiritual norm. They just won out at that time, and it's not surprising that they did, because they believed in evolution. And until Yehuda Nasi codified the Talmud was constantly changing before it was written down. So I don't think one could compare. I don't think it's applicable to compare the Zealots to modern times, because even if you look at like the most zealous of people over the last 50 years when it comes to like Zionism or Israeli politics, it's basically what political discourse is leading to right now. To be completely honest, one state removing a significant amount of Palestinians from Gaza, possibly even the West Bank, deporting terrorist supporters. So, it's just a little different.
I think her point was more that if everyone took a very aggressive approach to defending themselves and fighting back, we might hinder our own survival.
I don't think my approach is aggressive, personally. I don't see what the big deal is saying, learn self-defense. What anti-Zionists and the anti-normalization camp, academically, that's what it is. There is the normalization camp with the Jews, Zionism, Zionists in Israel, and there is the anti-normalization camp. The anti-normalization camp is the pro-Palestinian, pro-BDS camp. They don't want us to protect ourselves. They want us to be Jews of an exilic mind. They don't want us to defend ourselves, learn Hebrew, or have a connection to Israel. The entire movement is about taking the Judea out of the Jew out of Judea. Anybody that wants to sway Jews against protecting themselves, arming themselves, being prepared to use a weapon. Because, by the way, having a gun is not the same thing as being able to use it under pressure and being able to use it safely. The Jewish experience should teach every Jew to plan for the worst. And when we're not prepared, Jews die, in my opinion. Also, I want to say one other thing that's extremely important about those four groups. The Essenes were very messianic. The Zealots were very messianic. When Jews start talking about the Messiah, people die. And that is our history. Whenever we start saying, oh, the Mashiach's coming, oh, it's the end of times, oh, it's this, oh, it's that, people die. And that's very easy to trace in our history. Anytime there's a messianic movement, people die or have massive conversions to either Islam or Christianity. When Rabbi Akiva thought that Bar Kokhba was the Messiah, they all got wiped out. When the Zealots thought that the Mashiach would arrive and they reestablished the altar on the Temple Mount, they were all killed. The one thing that the rabbis, to their credit, even though I have a lot of problems with them, many of them have always tried to tamper that messianic fever.
That's actually what the professor said on the episode. And she said, stop calling for the Mashiach to come. Like, live your lives. Move on, build the society that you want to live in. Don't call for the Mashiach. But then the research I did asking my more observant friends and the people that I'm connected to, they said that it's very anti-Jewish of her because observant Jews are required to call for the coming of Mashiach. They're required to wish for the coming of Mashiach. So I didn't know how to reconcile that, actually.
First of all, I got to watch this episode because this is one of the episodes that I must have missed of yours before. So I got to watch this because I'm sure I'll find the conversation fascinating. I think there's a huge difference between Bonei Yerushalayim Bimhera B'Yameinu, wishing for the speedily rebuilding of Jerusalem and the coming of the Messiah that we pray for every day, versus Mashiach, everything is Mashiach, 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 Mashiach. Oh, Mashiach, Mashiach will come, we'll be saved by Mashiach. Mashiach, redemption, God willing, Mashiach will come and he will bring peace and then we will all be in yeshiva and we will all be studying Torah. Come on. There's a huge difference. Everybody knows there's a difference. It's dangerous. It's really been wonderful to see how many Chabad rabbis have started to tone down over the last couple of years, even though you hear them talking about Mashiach a little bit more because of October 7th, but it's not really, and I don't feel that it's about the Rebbe like it used to be, in my opinion. Some are, some aren't. I've become much more tolerant to that. When I was much younger, I was very intolerant of it just because of my experience in Israel, but I realized that different Chabad rabbis are different, and I've learned to be much more open about that kind of stuff. But there is a difference. I just think there's a huge difference when you're constantly thinking and talking about the Messiah versus actively doing what you need to do to be the Messiah in your own life and in your own community and in your own home, striving to be the best individual person that you can be before wanting to be saved by some mythological figure that you don't even know who it is. Alex Trayman, who's the CEO of JNS, once said this to me, and I thought it was the most beautiful thing. He goes, I'm the Messiah. He goes, I'm the Messiah with my family. I'm the Messiah at work. I'm the Messiah in my community because I'm trying to be the best version of myself all the time. And guess what? My wife is Mashiach because I see her try to be Mashiach with our children. It was something like that. I would disagree with your friend.
Okay. No. I like this. I like that you added the extra context. There was one thing I was thinking about as I was preparing for your episode, because I was doing research on you, obviously, and what you post about. And I was trying to organize my thoughts around the criticisms you have with Jewish nonprofits and their ineffectiveness, which I think is a valid criticism to have. And what I realized...
Can you tell me one thing they're effective at?
Okay. That's...
Your face right now is priceless. It's fantastic.
That's a good burn, Adam. What can I say? But where I netted out was I think it could be interesting if more organizations meant to serve Jewish people were not designed as nonprofits, but designed as for-profit businesses. Mm-hmm. Because I think it changes the incentive structure. And my friend Siggy, who is big in the investing space and building startups, he made a really interesting comparison for me that I wanted to share with you. There's an organization, I don't know how you feel about them, but they're very popular. They're called Jew Hate Database.
Love them. Great. Amazing.
They're meant to expose terrorists and bad people and empower Jewish people to feel strong, right? and to feel like we have control about what's happening to us, which is a really beautiful cause. They're a nonprofit organization meant to collect donations. They serve their donors, right? That's always the deal with nonprofit organizations. They serve the donors who give them money. They're always handcuffed by the donors. At the same time, there's another organization on the horizon called Terrorist Watch, and they're doing something very similar, if not identical, to Jew Hate Database. The difference is they're using AI. It's more like a tech-oriented startup founder. He's using what he calls Nasher AI to try to identify terrorists using photographic recognition. So automate maybe some of the work that Jew Hate Database is doing. He intentionally became a for-profit business as to not have the handcuffs that an organization like Jew Hate Database does. Because before it goes too long, an organization like Jew Hate Database may run into trouble if a big donor they have chooses not to redonate or whatever else.
So I have no idea about what shackles Jew Hate Database has. I think it's a disgrace that the ADL didn't write them $1 million check. I think it's a disgrace that the JNF didn't write them $1 million check. On Giving Tuesday, I wrote on my social media, if you're going to give once on Giving Tuesday, give it to Jew Hate Database. If you're going to give twice, plant a vine. And I really like the guys who are behind it. I don't see how it could be a business, personally, what they do. It's not a business. And I think that if anybody was donating to them and wanted to control them with their donations, that would be very detrimental to the unique, innovative work that they are doing, just kind of like us. I've been very clear, donors can give me their suggestions, but that doesn't mean I'm taking it. And don't expect me to take it because there's a reason why I'm doing the work, not you. Let me put it this way. Anybody that can root out the terrorists that are in the United States and the Jew haters that they're in the United States should do whatever version they feel like they need to do in order to do it. And you want to know something? If in 2 years, Jew Hate Database becomes a bloated organization and doesn't become effective in what they were doing anymore, which I highly doubt will happen, they will have had a number of years of doing very good work before evolving into something different. And like you just said, another for-profit thing has come up. I don't think that that type of work is going to be scarce. And we can sure rely on the $100 million organizations to produce, statistics, to tell us things that we already know. And we can always depend on the young people who are threatened and living under threat and who actually, are afraid to go to class or walk the streets or whatever because they don't have a chauffeur, because they're not making $1 million a year, okay, when we're already pretty wealthy to begin with. Those are going to be the people who are going to fight and bring the enemies of the Jewish people to the forefront, if that makes sense.
I have a question. It might sound like a question where I'm trying to challenge you, but I want you to explain your thought a little bit better. That's my intent. When you talk about an organization like Jew Hate Database, you say, you know what, if they run out of things to do, they become a bloated bureaucratic organization, they will evolve. They will find a new problem to solve because the line of business they're in opens opportunities for new problems to be solved, which is exactly how all businesses operate, right? You evolve or you die. At the same time, when you talk about an organization like ADL, you don't make the same comparison. For example, you say that an organization like ADL doesn't really have an incentive to combat anti-Semitism because they make more donations when there is anti-Semitism. My question to you is, why can't an organization like ADL evolve too, just like a Jew Hate Database?
Here's why. I'm going to use the JNF as an example first. 20 years ago, we helped build the Sderot playground for Greek-spilled Israel. It's been 20 years. How many Sderot playgrounds are there? How many playgrounds are there? There's one. Unless they've built a second one in 20 years, there's one. So they've been fundraising off the same damn thing for 20 years. Okay. Blueprint Negev. They went and built Abraham's Well, which is a tourist trap where people dress up biblically and they act weird. I am so sick of the Jewish industry. And if you look up the definition of industry, Jonathan Greenblatt, who called me an anti-Semite during our interview that I pulled out of our interview so he didn't look like an ass, okay, complaining that I shouldn't be using the word industry because I sound like an anti-Semite and I'm using the language of anti-Semites. It's just a bunch of bullshit. They have built an industry that is indestructible through the fact that they were able to con so many older Jews into believing that they would have a result and that they would be the caretakers of the next generation of the Jewish people and usher in a vibrant revival of Jewish identity. All these organizations, and they're all full of shit. because they all went after all these old people and got into their wills and hired hundreds of fundraisers to sell their line of snake oil BS trafe crap to old Jewish people that actually thought there would be a Jewish future, when instead we're dealing with the highest assimilation rates, and we let anybody call themselves a Jew that's a Jew, and we bend over backwards to anybody that says anything nice about us whatsoever. And the second that somebody wants to change their mind about us, they're praised as being a hero.
And they can't evolve. Why?
I'm going to tell you in just a second. Okay. Definition of industry: a manufacturing activity as a whole, a distinct group of productive or profit-making enterprises, a department or branch of a craft, art, or business, especially one that employs large personnel, capital, especially in manufacturing. Work devoted to a study or a particular subject. Jonathan Greenblatt said in my interview with him that they're not an industry because industries don't try to go out of business, and they would love to go out of business. Well, last time I checked, if you look at their 990s, they are doing the exact opposite of trying to go out of business. That is why they won't change or evolve. Think about it. What Jewish organizations are actually changing and evolving, and what Jewish organizations are actually providing the needs that are necessary for 21st century Jews? Very few of them, if there are any, they're local. You can make some arguments about the IAC doing some great work, and I know they do great stuff. API is still extremely relevant because they're the ones producing Greek Jewish leaders, great organization. But at the end of the day, the majority of these organizations, I have a call later with the president of Hadassah, who I grew up with. Her son is a very good friend of mine. But I remember a couple of years ago, before she became the president, I had a meeting in New York. And I said, what is the mission of Hadassah now? It was originally the Women's Zionist Organization. The main fundraiser of Hadassah looked at me and said, I don't know, but if you can figure it out, please tell me. An organization like the ADL has one job. Look at it from the for-profit perspective, okay? They have to sell philo-Semitism and outsell anti-Semitism. Now, if anybody was looking at the results of their work for 20 years since Jonathan Greenblatt took office and has gone from a $250,000 salary a year to $1.1 million, you would see that anti-Semitism is outselling philo-Semitism by over 1,000%. Okay? If that's the case, the board of directors would fire that person running that business, plain and simple. So I want to see organizations like that go out of business because they've done their job. Okay? Clearly, they're not doing their job. If students like me 17 years ago were saying, these people are connected to Hamas, okay, I'm checking for a bomb under my car. We need to figure out how we can start teaching Jews to defend themselves because anti-Semites are coming for us, which we now know and see, okay? I'm sorry. What have they been doing for 20 years? They're definitely not trying to put themselves out of business. They're only trying to grow. Okay, they're spending tens of millions of dollars on office space. They have large endowments that can pay for most of the things that they're doing. And really what they're doing is they're putting more money in the pockets of an elite group of American Jews who are trying to control the Jewish people in America and trying to push them in a direction. There is no way, I don't care if you're pro-life, pro any liberal cause that you can think of. Remember, I live in Tel Aviv. I'm more liberal than most Democrats, okay? Like, plain and simple, when you live in Tel Aviv, it is more liberal than any city in America. It puts San Francisco to shame. There is no way that anyone logically could have voted against Donald Trump if you were a Jew and you saw the world through the lenses of 3,500 years of Jewish history. And I don't say that to alienate anybody. It's not about you're a Democrat, you're a Republican, you see this, you see that. The fact is that there was one type of language that was about protecting the Jewish people, and there was another type of language that was about playing both sides, and apparently, from what we know now, sending an extreme amount of money to terrorists to help kill Jews. And at the end of the day, we have now learned that the UN has been completely complicit with Hamas and this war. And instead of taking a hard line, everybody has been playing both sides, because they want to be something they're not. You are only a Jew. The world will only see you as a Jew. Get over it. And when you realize that, that's when everything changes. That's when you look at things differently. When Kamala Harris was announced, I said, this is the dumbest idea ever. She's got the lowest approval rating, in the history of the vice presidency. This is a complete disaster. This is me in my political consulting mode. And there are people defending them because they're so brainwashed in this two-party system, and they want to be something they're not. They want to be liberal Americans, but they can't be. They're Jews. I think Jordan Tilch said it best. The liberal Jewish community, if you want to lump that, whatever that is, okay, and no disrespect to these people, by the way, are voting for their values over their own personal safety. All these values that Americans hold dear, they're okay with these liberal representatives making deals with all these eschatological apocalyptic regimes and communist regimes and dictatorships that deprive these people around the world of those rights. So when you can't recognize that hypocrisy, you're blind to the reality of the world and the way the world works. And the fact is that what you say matters and symbolism matters. History is driven by symbols. If you ignore those symbols, you can't understand where you're going. And that's why these organizations can't evolve, because they're not actually run by people that have the agenda of keeping the Jewish people safe. They have a different agenda. Because if they have a different agenda, here is the biggest piece of the puzzle. If anybody goes on Wine with Adam to see my last episode before I was asked to leave because the Biden administration was not very happy with the episode, and because the cultural attaché of the Biden administration after the episode had said some very derogatory things to me, and I finally, as I'm sure you have seen, once somebody starts at it with me, as the deputy foreign minister of the state of Israel says, somebody throws a punch at me, I will block it or take the hit, and then I will pull out a gun and shoot them in the head. I responded quite intensely to them, and it caused a ruckus, okay? But mostly it's because I really think the former ambassador did not look good in my interview. We were talking about the ADL and the White House's anti-Semitism policy paper. We had just finished a terrible discussion on Iran and it was very intense, and he didn't agree with me. And I said to him, I go, okay, let's change the subject. Let's talk about the White House anti-Semitism policy paper. And he goes, isn't it great? And I go, well, no, it's not. It's a disaster. And his mouth dropped, okay? The anti-Semitism policy paper that the ADL hailed as a historic achievement, okay? Historic achievements are the Declaration of Independence, the Magna Carta, the Torah, okay? The Treaty of Versailles. Those are historic documents, okay? The ADL and the Biden administration's policy paper on anti-Semitism is about as historic as the toilet paper that got flushed in the toilet an hour ago. Plain and simple. You can't have a policy paper on anti-Semitism that doesn't have the IHRA definition, that doesn't mention Israel, that doesn't mention Zionism, that doesn't mention anti-Zionism, but mentions Islamophobia 17 times. Now, I don't care who you are or what you say, but if you're going to try to sell me that bill of goods, you are corrupt. You are bad at your job. You should not be doing your job, and you need to get the out of the way for other people that can do your job a lot better than you. Because guess what? $100 million a year, okay, with $30 million being spent on office space and all the other salaries that they're paying could be spent on bringing Hebrew-speaking teachers over to America and providing free childcare to Jewish families so that the next generation of Jews grow up in a Hebrew-speaking environment, and in a 10-year period, we have a completely Hebrew-speaking Jewish community. We could be bringing self-defense teachers all over the United States. There is so much that we could be doing to actually fighting anti-Semitism. It could be paying for every Jewish family to have multiple guns and self-defense equipment in their home. Okay, it could be subsidizing Hebrew learning. It could be subsidizing Jewish education. I'm sorry. Don't sell me a bill of goods that while you're hobnobbing with celebrities that are too scared to say anything and are too uneducated to know what the they're talking about. And by the way, the greatest example of that was the Selena Gomez meltdown recently, or, Ben Stiller's article about nothing, okay, about nothing that everybody praised like he was such a hero. Like, I'm sorry. Stop lying to our people. We are not a dumb people. There is a reason why people have tried to kill us. There is a reason why we have succeeded in surviving for so long. And it ain't because we make a pact with Rome. When we make pacts with Rome that do not benefit us, we die. And I can tell you right now, if Kamala Harris would have been elected, not only would she have been the last president of the United States, but Jews would have gotten wiped out much quicker in the United States, and it would have become much more intense. I mean, just the fact that she made her husband look like he even practiced a version of Judaism was the most pathetic thing in the world. I don't know if you remember her first Hanukkah video when she was like, it's about rededication. Well, the rededication of what? Hanukkah is about Israel and sovereignty and Zionism and not assimilating. That is my answer. That is why an organization like that can't evolve. Okay, period, end of story. It's very simple.
Listen, for better or for worse, the entertainment value of that answer was just exceptional. Tell me, in the time that we have left here, you've spoken about the importance of learning Hebrew and being a Hebrew-speaking people and the importance of self-defense. Are there any other ways that individual people can start reclaiming their Jewish identity and, quote unquote, fighting back with the dynamics that we're seeing today?
Listen, in my opinion, everything begins with wine and planting vines and creating a connection to Israel physically. Israeli wine and having Israeli wine in your home on Friday nights, making Kiddush, observing Shabbat, however you want to observe it, but taking those 2 minutes, whether it's Berei Pri Hagafen or starting with Yom HaShishi, to sanctify that moment and to remember that you're a Jew, no matter what you're going to do the rest of that night or the rest of that week or whatever, and to put the land of Israel inside of you and to go visit Israel and to help build the economic independence of Israel. And that is the most important thing, in my opinion. And to be honest, I want to reach as many young people as possible that want to help us build the Israel Innovation Fund into something that can bring something to the table for every single Jew. I just left Texas and I was at an Olami Shabbat dinner. And I was talking about all the ways that people could get involved with our organization. Because as I joke, we're the anti-Jewish organization, whatever you want to say. Gil Troy has this great, I'm an anti-Semite, and he talks about the Jiu-Jitsu. That's necessary. You should totally interview Gil Troy. I'll connect you to him. He's great. My point of bringing that Shabbat dinner up to answer your question is this one kid, as I was pouring wine, asked me, he was like, hey, I have a really serious question. How can we get involved with you without spending any money? And my smile went to ear, okay, because it was the first time anybody asked me that question. And I was like, well, I go, we're trying, right now we're in a building phase. So raising money is very important. But I go, you can tell people about what we're doing. You can follow our content. You can like our content. You can send people, information about planting vines and send people information about planting vineyards. There are so many things that you can do. You can help us build a young leadership board in your city. You can connect us to people that you know that might like it. There isn't an organization that wants to give everybody that sense of fulfillment. The Jewish world is pay to play. And it has alienated and created a major aspect of the assimilation problem because even with synagogues, the rabbi don't care most of the time unless you're a big donor. And I mean, the greatest example was that Curb Your Enthusiasm episode where they were scalping high holiday tickets outside. There was an episode where Larry David buys scalped tickets for high holiday services. Theodore Herzl had this great saying in the Jewish state, we've been reduced to nothing but the faith of our fathers. Because of that, we are what has been produced by all of these organizations. And to me, going back to basics, starting just with drinking a glass of Israeli wine, because that's your history in a cup. It's your story in a bottle. It's the representation of 3,500 years of dreams and hopes fulfilled. That's where it all begins. Because when you can pop open a bottle with somebody that maybe isn't connected to Israel or isn't connected so much to what many people refer to as Judaism, you can say, let me pour you a glass of wine. Here's your history in a cup. Let's begin. When you can be completed as a Jew in your identity, there's nothing stronger than being able to hand that to somebody else. And that's really the responsibility. Zionism is responsibility as much as it is a national liberation movement. National liberation could be summed up as responsibility to each other, to the individual, and to recultivating the land. So when we start taking responsibility for each other's identity and safety, the Jewish people will be the most powerful people on this earth in some of the best of ways, not in a controlling the banks and media way, in a wonderful sense of what it is to be a unified, powerful people that see themselves all part of the link in the chain of our people's imperishability. As we say, start with wine, l'chaim.
Beautifully said. And how can people connect with you on social media and learn more about your work?
I'm on social media at Adam Scott Bellos on Instagram. There's Wine in the Vine. There's the Israel Innovation Fund. We're under TIIF. We have a YouTube page. I have a Twitter that I don't use. As Hillel Silverman said, I'm not allowed to tweet because apparently everything I say is ridiculous. So I tend not to tweet. If you DM me and you don't annoy me, I'll give you my WhatsApp number and then you can actually get to know me, because you can't really criticize me if you can't send me a WhatsApp because you don't know me well enough.
And I have one final question for you. It's one that I ask every guest. Who would you like to nominate for People Jew Want to Know?
One is Gil Troy, who you have to interview. The other is Zev Magen, who wrote the article on Lenin and Love, which turned into the book John Lennon and the Jews. He's the head of Near Eastern Studies for Bar Ilan University. The most genius Zionist Jewish identity thinker you will ever speak to. Went to Columbia, wrote an article called How to Fight Antisemitism that pissed off everybody. Expert on Iran. Read his article. I'll send you his article. You'll know why I'm suggesting him. Number 3 is Fleur Hassan Nachum. I definitely think you should have Fleur. And number 4 is Deputy Foreign Minister Sharon Eskel. I think that she's one of the youngest diplomats in Israeli history. And I don't think that enough young people have been able to connect with somebody her age that's in that position. And I think that she's, her grandmother was the one that was attacked in France. And I think just you will be able to connect with her very well. But I think those 4 people are all 4 very different types of Jews. And they're 2 women and 2 men. So I think that that's a very important mix.
Thank you so much. It's been a real privilege to have you on. I've learned a lot.
I've really enjoyed being with you.
If you've enjoyed this podcast, please go ahead and rate us 5 stars. Be the first to hear our episodes by subscribing to People Jew Want to Know wherever you get your podcasts. And for exclusive content, follow us on Instagram at People Jew Want to Know.